I've lived in this neighborhood for about 3 years now, and up until recently, I thought it was a pretty normal place. Quiet streets, nice houses, the usual suburban stuff. But my next-door neighbor, let's call him Mr. Graves, has always been a little off. He's probably in his late 50s, lives alone, and barely ever talks to anyone. I think I've only exchanged about 5 sentences with him in all the years I've lived here. He doesn't mow his lawn, his blinds are always shut, and sometimes, late at night, I'll see him standing in his backyard, just staring at nothing. No cigarette, no phone, no dog, just standing there, arms at his sides, completely still. The first time I saw it, I laughed it off. Maybe he's just an old guy with insomnia. But after the third or fourth time, it started to freak me out. I'd come home late from work, and there he'd be, just standing in the shadows of his overgrown yard, facing the street like he was waiting for something. He never waved. He never moved. And I swear to God, some nights, it felt like he was staring straight at my house. But whatever, right? Some people are just weird. That's what I told myself, until about a month ago. It was around 1 a.m. when I got home that night. My shift had run late, and I was exhausted, just wanting to crawl into bed. But as I got out of my car, I heard something strange coming from his house. At first, I thought it was just the TV on too loud. But then I realized it wasn't a TV. It was muffled screaming. My stomach dropped. I froze in my driveway, listening. It sounded desperate, panicked, like someone was begging, but the words were too muffled to make out. A woman's voice, maybe? Or a teenager? My heart started pounding as I strained to hear more. Then came the banging. Rhythmic, frantic, like someone was pounding against a door or a wall. My entire body went cold. I had two thoughts at once. 1. Call the cops. 2. What if I'm just imagining this? Maybe it was a horror movie playing too loud. Maybe it was a prank. But deep down, I knew. This didn't sound like a movie. This sounded real. I was debating what to do when, suddenly, the noises stopped. Dead silence. No screaming. No banging. Just the soft rustle of the wind. I stood there, holding my breath, waiting. And then, one of the upstairs blinds moved. A shadow shifted behind the window, Mr. Graves. He was just standing there, completely still. Watching. Not at me. Exactly. More like at my car. As if he wasn't sure if I'd just arrived or if I'd been there all along. A weird paranoia crept up my spine. Did he know I had heard something? I didn't wait to find out. I walked inside, locked every door, and sat in my living room with the lights off, just listening. But the night stayed quiet. The next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to tell myself I was just overthinking it. Everyone has their quirks, right? But the more I observed, the more strange things I noticed. One morning, I saw Mr. Graves dragging a large, covered tarp from his back door to the trash bin. I couldn't help but stare, wondering what he was trying to hide. The tarp seemed too heavy for a simple garbage bag, and when he tossed it in the bin, it made a weird clinking sound, like something metallic was inside. The garbage truck came early, but I made sure to look at the trash bin later, hoping to catch a glimpse of what he'd been so careful about. But the bin was empty, like it had been cleared before the truck even came. I couldn't stop thinking about that locked basement door I'd seen in his yard, tucked behind some old garden tools. It was strange, too, because the only windows in his basement were small and high up, making it hard to see inside. The next night, when I thought I was being discreet, I stood by my window and watched him. I saw him carry a bag into the basement, and he moved in a way that seemed almost too careful, as if he was hiding something. That's when I finally snapped. I had to know what was going on. I thought about calling the police, but then I second-guessed myself. What if I was wrong? What if I just sounded like a paranoid neighbor? But the next time I heard something, that scream, I could barely think straight. It was different this time. It wasn't just muffled. I could make out two voices, both pleading, and then the sound of something being slammed against a wall. That's when I finally couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and called the cops. I gave them the address and explained what I'd been hearing, but when they arrived, I was shocked. They knocked on his door, and Mr. Graves answered, all calm and collected, like he was expecting them. They left with nothing. No one was arrested. No one was searched. The cops told me it was likely just a domestic dispute, but they didn't find anything suspicious. They told me to call back if I heard more, but I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. Now, I'm just wondering if I should have gone in there myself. What if I never hear that scream again? What if there's someone locked in that basement, waiting for someone to finally listen?
It was a completely normal day, until I checked my mail. Bills, junk, a random catalog I never signed up for. And then a small plain envelope with no return address. That alone was weird. But what made my stomach drop was the handwriting on the front. It was familiar. Too familiar. My hands went cold as I traced my fingers over the ink, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. The letters were slightly crooked, like they'd been written in a hurry, but I recognized them immediately. My breath caught in my throat. This was Danny's handwriting. I stood in my doorway, gripping the envelope so hard my knuckles turned white. The logical side of my brain was already trying to make excuses. It's probably a prank. Someone's messing with you. But then I flipped it over and saw the postmark. My stomach lurched. It was dated yesterday. That shouldn't have been possible. The reason? Danny, my childhood best friend, had been missing for 10 years. Danny and I grew up together, inseparable from the time we were kids. We did everything together. Rode bikes until the streetlights came on, camped in the woods behind our neighborhood, built stupid forts out of stolen plywood. And then one night he was just gone. We were 16, coming back from a party a few blocks away. I remember every second of that night like a bad dream I can't wake up from. We were walking home, laughing about something stupid, when Danny suddenly said he heard something behind us. I turned around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty street, dark houses, the faint hum of a streetlight buzzing overhead. Dude, you're paranoid, I remember telling him. He laughed, but his face stayed tense. We walked a little faster. 2 blocks later, I looked away for 1 second, and when I turned back, Danny was gone. At first, I thought he was screwing with me, trying to scare me. I called his name, checked behind bushes, even laughed a little. All right, man, you got me. Come out. But he never did. The search for Danny went on for years. His parents were devastated, hiring private investigators, offering rewards, never giving up hope. But eventually, like all missing person cases that go cold, people moved on. They had to. I never did. And now, standing in my doorway, I was holding a letter written in his handwriting, postmarked just yesterday. I forced myself to tear it open, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Inside was a single piece of lined paper, creased like it had been folded in a hurry. The writing was rushed, almost frantic. I don't have much time. Don't tell anyone I contacted you. Please meet me at the place we used to hide when we were kids. Midnight. Come alone. Burn this letter. My pulse roared in my ears. No signature, but I didn't need one. This was him. It had to be. The hiding spot he was talking about was an abandoned shed in the woods behind our old neighborhood. A place we used to sneak off to when we wanted to skip school or hide from our parents. No one else knew about it. I read the letter again, then a third time, my mind racing. This can't be real. Maybe it was someone playing a sick joke. Maybe the handwriting just looked like his. But my gut told me otherwise. And the worst part? The part that made my skin crawl? Why did he want me to burn the letter? I sat there staring at the letter for what felt like forever, my mind racing in circles. Every part of me was screaming that this wasn't possible. Danny was gone. The police had searched for months. His face had been plastered on missing posters, news reports, even a documentary about unsolved disappearances. And yet, here I was, holding something that should not exist. My first instinct was to call someone, his parents, the cops, anybody. But then I reread the letter. Don't tell anyone. Burn this letter. That part made my skin crawl. Why was he so paranoid? What was he afraid of? And more importantly, what the hell happened to him in the last 10 years? I shouldn't have gone. I know that now. But at the time, my curiosity, and maybe my guilt, was stronger than my fear. So at 11:30 p.m., I grabbed my keys, a flashlight, and stuffed the letter in my pocket. The old woods were about a 20-minute drive from where I lived now, and by the time I got there, the world was dead silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, just a suffocating, unnatural stillness. My footsteps felt too loud as I made my way through the trees, my flashlight barely cutting through the dark. I hadn't been back here in years, but my feet still knew the path by heart. And then up ahead I saw it, the shed. It looked exactly the same. Same warped wooden planks, same half-broken door. Same feeling of something watching from the shadows. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and pushed the door open. The hinges screamed in protest. Inside it was pitch black. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the corner. Then a voice. Hoarse, dry, like it hadn't been used in years. "You came." My heart stopped. The beam of my flashlight landed on a figure crouched in the corner, pressed against the wall like a wounded animal. His clothes were torn, his hair was long and matted, and his skin looked pale as a corpse, but I knew him. I would always know him. It was Danny. I opened my mouth to say something, to ask him a million questions at once, but he shook his head frantically, putting a shaking finger to his lips. "No time. You shouldn't be here." His voice was barely a whisper, and his eyes kept darting behind me, scanning the darkness like he was expecting something, or someone, to come crashing through the trees at any moment. "Danny, where have you been? What happened to you?" I finally managed to choke out. But he just grabbed my arm, his grip ice cold. "They let me go." His voice was softer than before, and I felt my stomach drop. "Who?" I whispered. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine, and what he said next will haunt me forever. "I don't know. But they'll come back for me." A branch snapped outside. Danny's face went white with terror. He pushed me hard, forcing me back toward the door. "You have to go." His voice was urgent now, no longer whispering. "I'm not leaving you here." I shot back. But before I could do anything, he shoved something into my hand. A folded piece of paper, crumpled and worn. "Burn it," he repeated, voice shaking. "Burn it and don't come back." The snapping sounds outside were getting closer. Heavy footsteps, too many of them. Something was out there. Danny turned away, retreating into the shadows of the shed. His final words were barely audible. "I'm sorry." Then before I could stop him, he vanished into the darkness. I ran. I don't even remember making it back to my car. Only the overwhelming panic pounding in my skull. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I pulled over and opened the crumpled note Danny had given me. It was just 2 words, written in the same frantic handwriting as the first letter. "Not alone." I burned both letters that night. I never went back. And I never saw Danny again.
I take Ubers all the time. I work late shifts, and driving home half asleep isn't worth the risk. I've never had a bad experience before, until last night. I was leaving work at around 11:45 p.m., exhausted after a brutal shift at the restaurant. I just wanted to go home, take a hot shower, and pass out. I pulled out my phone and called for an Uber like usual. Within 2 minutes, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The car matched the description on the app, the license plate was correct, and when I leaned in to check, the driver, an older guy, maybe in his 50s, with thinning gray hair, turned to me and said, "For my name?" His voice was deep, almost mechanical, like he had said the phrase 1,000 times before. I nodded, mumbled a tired, "yeah," and got in the back seat. The moment I shut the door, something felt off. The car smelled weird, a mix of cologne and something else, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the usual old car smell or even a bad odor, just off. Like artificial sweetness, mixed with something chemical. I brushed it off and focused on my phone as we pulled away. The guy was completely silent, which I didn't mind. I hate small talk with strangers. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. I was scrolling through emails, barely paying attention, until I noticed something strange. We were on a different road than usual. My usual route home is pretty straightforward, a couple of main streets, a left turn, then a short ride down my neighborhood's back road. But this guy had taken a wrong turn. I sat up a little straighter, watching the unfamiliar streets blur past the window. Maybe it was a detour? But my gut was already twisting. I glanced at the Uber app to check the route, and that's when my stomach dropped. The destination had changed. The pin, which should have been leading to my apartment, was now guiding us toward the outskirts of town, an area I didn't recognize. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't changed it. He hadn't asked me anything. So how did it? I slowly lifted my eyes to the rearview mirror, trying to see the driver's face. He wasn't looking at me, but his expression was completely blank. Like he was just driving. I swallowed hard, my fingers hovering over the call for help button on the Uber app. My heart was hammering so loud I swore he could hear it. Before I could press it, the driver spoke for the first time. "Don't worry. Just a small detour." His voice was too calm. Too rehearsed. And that's when I noticed something else. The door locks were already engaged. My pulse spiked. My thumb hovered over the call for help button in the Uber app, but something in me hesitated. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just a weird reroute, and he really was taking a small detour. But then I glanced back at the map, and my stomach dropped even further. The pin wasn't leading to any street or recognizable landmark. It was taking us to an empty part of town. No businesses. No houses. Just fields and industrial lots. That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I think you missed my turn." The driver didn't react at first. He just kept driving, eyes locked on the road, like he hadn't heard me. My skin crawled. I cleared my throat, trying again, louder. "Hey, man, I think you need to turn around. This isn't the right way." Finally, he tilted his head slightly, but he didn't look at me. His voice was too calm. Too rehearsed. "Almost there." "Almost where?" My heart was pounding now, my fingers inching toward the door handle. But then I remembered, the locks were on. I took a slow, shaky breath, forcing myself to stay calm. If I panicked, he'd know. He'd know that I knew. I reached for my phone again, but before I could do anything, I heard it, the quiet click of the volume button. I glanced down. My phone screen was off. The Uber app had closed. And that's when I realized, my reception was gone. No bars. No Wi-Fi. No way to call anyone. Every nerve in my body was screaming run. But I was trapped in a moving car with a man I did not know, driving me to God knows where. I did the only thing I could think of, I forced a laugh, trying to sound casual. "Hey, man, my girlfriend's waiting for me. She's tracking my ride. If I'm late, she'll call the cops." A lie. But a good one, I hoped. For the first time since the ride started, the driver's hands tightened on the wheel. I saw the subtle clench of his jaw in the rearview mirror. He knew I was lying. The car slowed. Not stopped, just slowed, like he was debating something. I didn't wait to find out what. My hand shot to the lock button, yanking at it over and over, my fingers slipping from sweat. My breathing was ragged now, my vision tunneling. The car was still moving, but slower, he was hesitating. I made a choice. I grabbed the door handle with both hands and kicked as hard as I could. The lock popped. The door swung open, and before I could second-guess myself, I jumped. For a split second, I felt weightless, and then pain exploded through my body as I hit the ground, rolling across the pavement. My head cracked against the dirt, my elbows burned, but I was free. I barely had time to process it before I scrambled to my feet, sprinting toward the nearest streetlight in the distance. Behind me, I heard the screech of tires. He had stopped. He was watching me. I didn't stop running until I reached a gas station about half a mile away. The clerk stared at me as I burst in, scraped up, panting, shaking. I could barely get the words out, but when I did, his face went pale. "You're the second person tonight." I froze. "Another guy came in here an hour ago," he said slowly. "Same story. Said his Uber driver took him the wrong way. He ran here, just like you." A shiver ran down my spine. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking. Reception was back. The Uber app was still open. The ride? It was never marked as complete. The driver's name, his picture, all gone. Like he'd never existed. I reported everything to the police, but I already knew what they'd say. The same thing they always do. We'll look into it. But they never did. And somewhere out there, that car is still driving. Still picking people up. Still looking for the next one.